Judges chapter 17, and we'll probably cover 17 and 18 today because they really need to be done together. So we're going to run across something that's been dubbed the priesthood of mankind, which is maybe better labeled the priesthood of humanism, which is our tendency to make a God of our own understanding, one that's good in our eyes, good for us, a God that agrees with us, likes our politics, our profession, likes what we do. And sometimes, we have in our human sort of religion that we create, of God of our understanding, we create a high priest of this. And sometimes that high priest is a person, and sometimes it's us. Sometimes it's the person, the human. Sometimes, though, it's a political system. Sometimes it's a profession or a job. You can think of people like that. Their whole life revolves, and their number one commitment is towards their job. And same with the political system. We make that idol within our life that we set on high. Think of a movement, an organization. Even a church can be that. And humanism can certainly find its way into church, and it has in our days. Think of a school system maybe, or just education in general. And all of these things, we make the language of those things as sort of a priestly language that helps us to facilitate our God of our own understanding. And it's all comes so very natural to us, and it sounds so good, and it tickles our human ears, and the reality is that none of that has any bond to Scripture whatsoever, other than what Scripture says against those kinds of things. It doesn't improve our eternal position in any way, although we can convince ourselves of those things. It simply affirms the fallenness of man. It affirms those feelings, those emotions that we as humans have, and it really helps us as humans to remain on the throne in our fallen state, in a fallen world, to walk daily in a way that is good in our own eyes. But in reality, the sad part is that you're edging ever closer to the reality of all eternity and to the God of all eternity. And so as we enter into this, we'll get a little bit of a flavor for that at the time of Judges. We go into this last section of Judges starting in chapter 17. We're not going to see any more Judges now. And what we're going to do is we're going to get a glimpse into the life and the culture of what was going on at this time during these Judges. And so we tend to read Judges as this happened, then that happened, and then this happened, and then that happened. And when you get to this, you're looking at, hey, this is kind of a snapshot of the culture. And so some of the things that we'll read about, sort of the people things, may have been in a sort of chronological order, but there's many that think this is more of happened during the time of the Judges. It could have been anywhere in this period of time that this has fallen, because it's not so much about the little story that is being shown, but it's the bigger picture that you're being shown that says characterizes this age of the Judges. And so what we see is an absence of leadership, an absence of organized religion. We see substitutes put in place. We see moral and ethical boundaries established only on a personal level and not yielding to sort of an existing principles or set of values. And we see we see the breakdown of family, and we see the breakdown of the nation in many ways. And in the end, I think if we sort of take these mental notes at least, as we go through this, I think a lot of this is going to look very familiar to you. Let's jump into chapter 17. Now there was a man from the mountains of Ephraim whose name was Micah, and he said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you and on which you put a curse, even saying, it in my ears. Here is the silver with me. I took it. His mother said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my son. So when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a carved image, a molded image. Now therefore I will return it to you. Thus he returned the silver to his mother. Then his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image. And they were in the house of Micah. So there's sort of the first little group of information that we're given about the time. And it starts about this man that lives in the mountains of Ephraim. If you sort of look at your map, you'd see Ephraim is sort of in the middle of the nation of Israel, of what was Israel at that time. The middle from north to south and sort of from east to west, that Ephraim was in the center. If you think about what we've run into Ephraim talking about the judges, particularly remember in the story of Gideon that the Ephraimites said, hey, why didn't you come to us and talk to us about what you're planning on doing? So the Ephraimites sort of saw themselves as these informal leaders that you need to check with us and get our approval before you go acting in some way, in some fashion against those that oppress us. And so the Ephraimites sort of saw themselves as these informal leaders, but you certainly don't see that play out too much here. So there was a man from the mountains of Ephraim. His name was Micah, whose name means who is like Yahweh, which is kind of an interesting name. Who is like Yahweh? And so you get a little glimpse and you go, how do you get a name like that? Well, his parents obviously had at least some concept of Yahweh in their life. And so we're not that far removed from a generation that followed the Lord and have these, sort of visible experiences where they could see the Lord's movement and that walked it, even a few of them that came through the wilderness. And that generation that crossed in and took the land and saw the faithfulness of the Lord, that he said, go and conquer the land. And the Lord empowered them and gave them that ability to do that. But when that generation passed away, if you remember at the beginning of Judges, the Lord said he allowed some of those other nations to stay in there so that the next generation would know that they needed to fight. They needed to know how to fight, to hold the land, to possess the land that the Lord had given them. And that was going to be an important part of their existence, that they had to learn to fight for what they believed in, and that the Lord had allowed that to take place. This is going to be important as we go on. So Micah is in the mountains of Ephraim. His mother, we don't see Dad anywhere. And he said to his mother, hey, Mom, by the way, that 1,100 shekels, if you look at the word shekels, it is italicized in most Bibles because it does not exist in the original language, and it's an assumption. It's like the 1,100 that was going to be paid, 1,100 pieces of silver was going to be paid to Delilah by the 5 different people. We don't really know if that was shekels or not. We don't know the denomination. So it's sort of an assumption here. If it was shekels, then we'll see later that there was 10 pieces of silver, or 10 shekels, that became an acceptable wage for the priest for a whole year. And so 1,100 is a significant number. This was probably Mom's dowry, which is sort of an insurance policy that should she ever end up with a widow, that this money would help her to survive and provide for herself. This 1,100 shekels was stolen, and it said she had wholly dedicated that silver to the hand of the Lord. And what I see here is that her 1,100 shekels was stolen, and so she dedicated it after it was stolen to the Lord, and then used the Lord's name to put a curse on the 1,100 shekels and on that person that had stolen them shekels, which was probably the motivation for her son, who heard this curse on his life, go, oh boy, I don't want that on me. And he's motivated to say, Mom, I took the money. And Mom celebrates that he gives it back. She doesn't smack the snot out of him for being a thief. But she So something just kind of broke there, you know. It's like, let's deal with the fact that you were a thief first. But she immediately flips this curse over and uses the name of Yahweh to put this curse on it because she had wholly dedicated. Wholly dedicated says, this 1,100 shekels is yours, Lord. It's for your service. And so previously, you know, or excuse me, what would be the future when something was dedicated like that, and probably even previously, that it was given to the priest, given to the temple to facilitate ministry. It was a gift that says it's dedicated to the Lord. And if it was kept in any way, it was used in a fashion that was just strictly for the furtherance of God's work in some way. This is wholly dedicated to the Lord, this 1,100. She wants to flip this curse into a blessing using the name of Yahweh. You see right there in verse 2 that the Lord is all caps, and that is the name of Yahweh. She is using the name of Yahweh. But then she takes this and says, this was dedicated from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a molded image. You go, time out, something don't fit right. That's like a red flag ought to be going up. Your mom was paying for an idol to be made for her son. And you go, what is going on here? So this carved image and molded image is most likely a single object. It's the way it was said that it sort of comes across in the English that it might be two. I think it was probably the way it was made, that it was a carved object that was then overlaid with silver or some precious metal or gold, you know, and so it was carved first and then molded over with this precious metal to make this single idol. There's a lot of debate on that. It really doesn't matter whether it's one idol, two idols, when you're going down that path. It's bad regardless. And so the son returns this. Mom then in turn gives 200 shekels to the silversmith. Again, we don't know that it's shekels for sure. We're going to go with that because the translators felt that way. If that's 200 shekels, that's still a decent amount of money. But you go, I thought you dedicated all 1,100 shekels to the Lord. What happened to the rest of it? And so to dedicate it all to the Lord and then withhold it is just outright thieving or going back on your vow, which was, again, sort of serious matter. So you begin to see immediately, no farther than we are in this, you begin to see things stack up. Dad's not on the scene. The son has stolen this money. Mom has wholly dedicated it so her son can make an idol. She gets the money back, but she doesn't give all of it then away to this work of the Lord, if you can call it that. You can't. That was her intention. And she's using the name of Yahweh, but she's drastically confused, right? And so you're trying to say are her intentions good? She's using the name of Yahweh. She's trying, but can you call those good intentions when it's idolatry? Because frankly, to build an idol like this and to do this, the rest of the community should have taken her out and stoned her. That's the Old Testament law, right? Like, she should have known this is so far out of bounds. But this is the first picture of the culture that the writer wants to see. This is the time of the judges. This is what they're dealing with. Is that there is no sort of formal understanding. This is how far they fell in that one generation that followed the Lord across the Jordan River into the promised land and conquered the land. And we're just one generation away from that, and this is how far they've fallen. Because they didn't follow the Lord's direction and root all of that out, and they began to be like their neighbors that they allowed to live when the Lord told them not to. They allowed all these things to stay in their presence, and then they began to adopt these things within their own life. Let's go on into verse 5. The man Micah had a shrine and made an ephod and household idols, and he consecrated one of his sons who became a priest. And in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so we see this, we'll call it an excuse given, a reason given for the way things are, because in those days there was no king in Israel, as if we just had a king, we wouldn't be doing these things. But you sort of say, well, where's personal accountability first? But there was no leadership. There was no spiritual leadership, apparently, to the point that as a nation, we remember our God and how we were brought to this nation, to this promise, and what is our right response to our God, and what does he expect of us, and to act those ways. Instead, the response was, we just do what's right in our own eyes. We just do what's right in our own eyes, which means every one of us have a different understanding, a different reality of what should be good, what's right for me. And you can have your truth and I can have my truth, and we can just all do our own thing. And as I said, you begin to read this and you begin to see similarities, and you start saying, hey, isn't some of that going on today? But it isn't. It's the same enemy. We're the same fallen race of people, the human race that existed in those times. And when sort of the moral compass has been removed, when the single point of reference and the single point of truth from which everything else flows has been removed, then you're just a small ship in a big ocean and just going where the wind blows. Because you have no anchor point. You have no point of reference. You don't have anything that's stationary from which everything else is measured. And when that's missing, anybody can argue with anyone else that your way is no better than my way, because there is no point of reference. Micah, he had his own way. He was doing what was good in his eyes. He got a pretty expensive idol out of this, and he went ahead and made him a shrine. This was probably a very well-known religious center in the mountains of Ephraim. Made an ephod too. Remember what an ephod is? We see the temple, the priests made an ephod that had the stones, and so when the priest went in before the Lord, he was bearing his brothers and sisters. This was the other tribes representative, and they had him on his shoulders. And they went with him into the presence of the Lord. This was him bearing the loads of them. And so when the priest went in, he wasn't going in of himself, but he was going in as a representative of his people. I don't know what Micah was representing when he went in, but he built an ephod, and one of the things the ephod or the priests had like a pocket in it for the Urim and the Thummim, which was some way for them that the Lord used to speak to them, to answer their questions, to get guidance from the Lord. We don't know how it worked, but we know that the Lord designed this for the priests to do this in the temple, in the presence of the Lord, in a very specific way after sin had been dealt with, and in this setting of the tabernacle. Not in a person's home, in their personal shrine, with an idol. And so what he has done, and this is what they call it, syncretistic worship, they basically taken a little bit of Baal worship and a little bit of Ashtoreth, and they mixed a little Yahweh in it, and we just took all the culture and we just smashed it all together into a nice religious buffet, and you can just eat whatever you want off that buffet. And you don't have to take any of the bad stuff that tastes bad to you or doesn't settle good to you, because we're just eating what's good in our own eyes, right? We're just religiously feeding on what feels good to us. And so we can grab all the gods, and we can just eat the cotton candy and eat all the desserts, and just whatever tickles our fancy, whatever makes us feel good. And this is what Micah created. He's created a religious center. Now here's the sad part about this that kind of goes unsaid until a little bit later, is he's in the mountains of of, um, of Ephraim. And in the mountains of Ephraim is Micah's home. And he sets up this religious sign. And we'll see later that it was being used by people within the area, and people knew about this. And so here's how it probably worked: is people like, hey, I want to know what God says about this. So they go to the shrine. Micah uses his ephod, and he divines what the Lord says. But we know, look at this, that this is not the Lord. This is not his way. If anything is given messages through Micah, it is not Yahweh. Now, that doesn't say that the Lord couldn't use this whole situation for his glory, but that's not God giving answers that way. But here's the sad part of what I was trying to get to, is very nearby is the tabernacle of the Lord. Right there in the same mountains of Ephraim at Shiloh. The tabernacle of the Lord still is there. But we hear nothing about it. We hear nothing about the priests. We hear nothing about serving and worshiping the Lord at that. But we hear all of this focus towards Micah, and we're going to see more of it towards Micah. It's as if there's a fork in the road there, and everybody is turning left. Because we used to go that way, and that's where their parents met God. That's where their parents dealt with their sin. That's where they worshiped him. That's when they saw the cloud of glory settle on the tabernacle and said, that's our God. That's the one that led us out of Egypt and brought us through the wilderness, and that he gave us this promised land. That's our God. And they knew that, and they knew what was expected of him. And now this generation has turned left. To say there's no king is to maybe to look at that and understand that there was a king that would lead them and guide them to that, to help to maintain that, but it dismisses personal responsibility to hold on to what every one of us would know to be right. Let's move on. Verse 7, now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite. Then we staying there. The man departed from the city of Bethlehem in Judah to stay wherever he could find a place. Then he came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah as he journeyed in. And Micah said to him, where do you come from? And he said, I am a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm on the way to find my place to stay. He is going to find his place in the world. A Levite to find his place in the world wasn't unheard of. And there was nothing necessarily wrong with that. Verse 10. Micah said to him, dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance. So the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man. And the young man became like a son to his sons to him. And so Micah consecrated the Levite. And the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. And then Micah said, now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since I have a Levite as priest. You see it stacking up. You see the message that says, hey, this is what the culture looked like in the times of the judges. And you say, how much worse can it get? Well, let's show you. A Levite that was supposed to be that spiritual leadership that understood the scriptures, and he wouldn't have been a son of Aaron, he wouldn't have been a priest, but he would have been a Levite. And so he should know, as really all of them should, that he's looking to find his way, and he sees a sweet deal to be a personal priest with someone that has their own ephod, their own shrine set up, and this idol set up. And that seems like a good idea to him. And after all, it's 10 shekels of silver, a change of clothes, and all the food you can eat. And so it almost seems like the justification for the Levite to do that is because it was a good deal. Because in a land that was being oppressed and had lost its way, and that there was no real guidance in the land, that this was a good deal. So the Levite took the deal. The Levite was from Bethlehem. I find offense in that. An embarrassment to Bethlehem. To read that in the scripture, and we thank God that we know that there was a real high priest and a real prophet and a real king that came from Bethlehem, and that made us forget sort of this dark time from when this man came out of Bethlehem. This worship center is set up and created. Again, I sort of see it as a fork in the road. The culture has turned left and gone towards idolatry. Let me tell you a little bit about the idolatry. They would have taken this idol and whatever it may have looked like, and there were all kinds of little, household items, little trinket types that they made of pretty good size idols at times. And for the money that they invested in this, it must have been something significant that everybody would say, wow, he's got a really good one. Let's go worship there. And so they spent a significant amount of money in this idol. And what they would do is and I love the way Isaiah pictures it. It talks about the craftsman going out to the woods, and he cuts down a tree, and he's carving, and he's doing all of this work, and he's making this idol, and then he takes some of that wood and he burns it in a fire to make a sandwich, and then he falls down and worships the other piece. Well, what if you get confused and make your sandwich with the wood that was supposed to be the idol? Now, he doesn't say this, but Isaiah doesn't say that, but that's kind of the point. It's like, how do you know which was supposed to be the idol and which was okay to burn in a fire for your sandwich? It's ridiculous because it's just wood and there's nothing to it. And what they would do then is they would carve this idol and they would overlay it, make it very beautiful and intricate. And they would have a ceremony, and they would, do some religious and speak some words over this idol, and supposedly the God would come down and that idol would then become this representative of God. And so they went through some religious mumbo-jumbo to sort of turn this idol from a piece of wood into some religious object. You sort of see a similar thing. The Levite now comes, and they have the idol in the shrine, and his son was acting as priest, and his son gets apparently fired, and the Levite gets his job to be the priest because, after all, he's a Levite. We got our own Levite. This is going to draw a bigger crowd. And business will be good. Religious business will be good, right? And so the Levite came, and then Micah consecrates him. Man, it just keeps getting worse. He has no authority to consecrate. He has no power. He has and we can see he doesn't know what he was doing to consecrate him, but he's even using the language that is used to talk about consecrating priests within the temple. So it's sort of all this copying, but it's a poor copy. Which is what we catch ourselves saying all the time about what the enemy is doing. That the devil is constantly copying what God has done, except what God does is authentic. What the enemy does is phony and fake, and it's a copy, and it's cheap, and it's never done right, and never done well. And that's all he's doing. Is this consecration was a picture of taking the priest's hand and putting that hand to work. It was to put something in his hand. And so consecration, quite literally, that you took that priest and put something in his hand. And so this priest, what they put in his hand, is sort of a picture of putting this idol into his hand. And maybe what Micah saw was going into his hand was more money. And I suspect that was what the case. He's overjoyed. Now I know the Lord is with me. Man, this is going to be so good. Chapter 18. Verse 1, we get the same sort of moniker or marker that reminds us, you know what, in those days there was no king in Israel. Which is, again, this thing that everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. I think you could sum that up as saying we knew there was something greater. Well, there was no king. We knew there was something greater. We knew there was something that was missing. We were searching for answers in the time of Judges, and maybe this is how they describe it. We didn't know what we were looking for, but we knew something was missing. We did not have what our ancestors had, and we kept looking, and we were trying other things. The new and improved religion. You go to every Christian bookstore, and And every time you turn around, you can see the new understanding of this, or the improved that, or this new 10 methods to making your prayer more powerful, or what happened to the old ones, man? There's nothing wrong with them. Because they're the authentic. They're what's right. This is where God has given us those things, in our personal encounters with him that are consistent with his word. They were searching for something. They're pumping all of their whole life, all of their efforts. This is what humanism is, right? We're just chasing after all this stuff that makes us feel good, that affirms us, that we, tickles our emotions, takes care of me here and now, makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I get at least a momentary contentment or goodness or gladness out of it. But in the end, it's junk. It doesn't deliver anything. Clouds without rain. And in the end, I find that the hole is still empty, and I got to go find something new to throw in the hole. And we just keep pumping junk into the darkness and find that the darkness has no bottom. I heard somebody say, I don't remember where I read it, where I know a little bit of English. I don't remember where I read it, but nobody ever went into a dark room and turned the dark on. And it's just one of the sort of simple things that you always go into the dark room and you turn the light on. And it's like they just refuse to turn the light on. We see the same thing in our culture, right? They refuse to make any allowance for the light because they know what comes with the light. And the light is not going to affirm me and make me feel good about where I'm at, and it's not going to allow me to live the way I want to live. You don't understand that it's their heart that is creating all of this baggage that they're dragging around and trying to figure a way to drag it. I think we all got the same stuff going on. Even as Christians, we sometimes are dragging baggage that we should have let go of years ago. I guess that's a deep topic that goes on and on. Let's move on. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in. For until that day, their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. So the Danites had an inheritance. It was between Benjamin's on the east. It was, I think, Ephraim on the north and Judah on the south. It was sort of off to the west side of it, went to the coast, a big part of which was filled with Philistines and a couple of Philistine cities. The Danites had a territory, and that territory was taken and was initially secured, but they could not keep it. And they never really completely took ownership of it. And the oppression of the Israelites was just more they wanted to deal with. And so they have decided we're going to go seek another inheritance, which is really kind of telling when you put it that way. I don't like the one God gave us. It's not working out good. I think God made a mistake. So we're going to go find a better place. And it gets worse. So the children of Dan sent 5 men and their family from the territory, men of valor from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land. That was right where Samson was from. To spy out the land and search it. And they said to him, go search the land. So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and they lodged there. And while they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. They turned aside and they said to him, who brought you here, and what are you doing in this place? What do you have here? And he said to him, thus and so Micah did for me, and he has hired me, and I have become his priest. So they said to him, please inquire of God, that we may know whether the journey on which we will go will prosper. I'm no priest and I'm no prophet, But I can tell you, they already had a word from God. God said, here's the land that I've given you. Go and take it and live in it and possess it. They have decided to seek another inheritance. And now they want to inquire of God to see if God is okay with it. And where did they go? But to the unholy temple, this abomination for which the law says you should be stoned, to inquire of the God, their God. You know, at some point, originally you go, look, if you know the right God, sometimes you make mistakes about the right way of seeking him or the right way of worshiping him. When you continue to make those mistakes over and over and you never seek to improve or to remedy that, to learn and grow, because the Lord will take care of those things and bring you so you have a right understanding. It's never fully complete, right? Because his awesomeness won't fit in our mind. But we have the right God and we worship him the right way. And that has to be the foundational part of our life. When you got the wrong understanding of God and you're worshiping the wrong way, there ain't much to work with because there is no anchor point again. You say, well, they kept using the name of Yahweh, but there is no evidence that they really have any understanding of Yahweh. It's like someone today using the name of Jesus and saying we celebrate Christmas because it's the birth of Jesus, and you begin to sort of look into their life and you go, there is absolutely zero evidence that they know anything about Jesus. It's not to be a criticism, it's just the evidence says there's a problem here. Anyway, the Danites are seriously confused. They want to inquire of God about something that he's already told them and that they should know. And they go to the young Levite and they get excited because they find a Levite at the house of Micah. They got a Levite. Tell us what God says. And he immediately gives them the answer that they want to hear. Go in peace. The presence of the Lord, Yahweh, he uses the name of Yahweh. Man, this just seems dangerous. It's like you're waiting for a lightning bolt to come down and nail this guy. Go in peace. The presence of Yahweh, the presence of the Lord will be with you on your way. And so this priest has now blessed the mission of the Danites. So the Danite confusion about spiritual things could be maybe summed up this way, and this is probably not very complete. They were looking for spiritual counsel to find a new home for which they had already been given. But they sought spiritual counsel from a heretical priest who uses idols and shrines, using divination in hopes to hear the will of a righteous God, ultimately seeking to affirm what was right in their own eyes about a sinful mission of finding what looked good to them. And the Levite accommodated them. Tickled their ears. Everybody was happy. Money changed hands. Business is good. And they called it religion. And if you think that's not happening today, you're not paying attention. It's happening all around. Probably another topic, another sermon for another day. Verse 7. So the 5 men departed, and they went up to Laish. It's in the northernmost part of the original territory. They think is probably the farthest north that the original spies went to spy out the land. It's right up against the base of Mount Hermon. It is right nearby. It's very, very close to where Caesarea Philippi would end up being in the times of Jesus. And that was a very old city, and there may have been even stuff there at that time. That there was so much idolatry, so much pagan worship going on, and so many different shrines on Mount Hermon. You can see some evidence of that even still today in some of the ruins. It's fascinating to read about. And this is right where they're at, right in the thick of that is where they go. They saw a people who were there, how they dwelt safely in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure, because really safety and quiet and secure is really the only thing that matters, right? And there were no rulers in the land, and nobody to set up boundaries for them, put a fence around them, nobody to threaten their way. They could essentially do what was right in their own eyes and not be threatened by anyone about it. There were no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. They were far from the Sidonians, and they had no ties with anyone. So originally Laish was probably a Sidonian territory. It was under Sidonian rule several times in its history. Sort of this area of Sidon, remember, is on the coast of the Mediterranean. Usually always talking about Tyre and Sidon. Tyre was the island city, and then Sidon was north of that. So if you remember sort of where Tyre and Sidon was, you go straight east to the base of Mount Hermon. That is territory the Sidons would have even gone that far inland. They had some understanding or thought that this may have been Sidonian in nature, but apparently was far enough away it was not being guarded, watched over, governed by them in any way. It was just a little city that was a secure, forgotten about, and it excited them because it looked like easy pickings. Then the spies came back to their brethren at Zorah and Eshtaol, verse 8, and their brethren said to them, "What is your report?" Verse 9. These is 5 spies go out. And the language here, look at the language when Joshua sends spies into the land before he crosses the Jordan. Look at the language when Moses sends spies into the land. The language is very similar, almost the same words, same phrasing is used in these, and so it's kind of fascinating. Verse 9. So they said, "Arise, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it was very good. Would you do nothing? Would you do not hesitate to go and enter to possess the land? When you go, you will come to a secure people in a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth." This is almost the exact same word that was used for the territory that Dan was supposed to originally give, that the Lord actually carved out and said, "Dan, this is your piece of land. And it's a great land, and just go in and take it, and it's yours." And what you're going to find there is a land that's going to be a blessing to you if you live it for the Lord. And you go, why didn't this work out for Dan? Did the Lord fail them in some way? Or did they fail them in some way? And they got so far from the Lord in one generation, they forgot what was promised, what was given to them, and they sought their own way instead. I think in our heart we know all of those answers. We know those answers in our own culture. Verse 11, 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there, from Zorah and Eshtaol, and they armed with weapons of war. They went up and encamped at Kirjath-jearim in Judah. It's kind of a staging area right at the edge of Dan's territory before going into Judah. It's not exactly known where, but apparently a staging area for the Danites. Therefore, they called the place Mahane Dan, which is a camp of Dan. It's there to this day. There it is west of Kirjath-jearim, verse 13, and they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim, and they came to the house of Micah. And again, I imagine the Danites going down the road. So there's a sign that says Shiloh this way, Micah's shrine this way. And they go, "Hey, we're going left." It probably wasn't quite that blatant, but it feels that way, does it not? It feels like that, what the culture was defined, and this is what we're being shown. This is the way people thought. That the first order of business was not to go before the Lord, not to go to Shiloh and worship him and seek his blessing and bring an offering and a gift to the Lord, all of the many blessings that he brought in our life, but to go to this pagan shrine and hear from those gods, and they're easier to get to, and you don't have to deal with all this other stuff. Verse 14, then the 5 men who had gone out to spy the country of Laish answered, and they said to their brethren, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod, household idols, and carved image, and a molded image? Now therefore consider what you should do. In verse 15, so they turned aside there, and they came to the house, and the young Levite man to the house of Micah, and greeted him. Verse 16, the 600 men armed with weapons of war, who were of the children of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land, they went up. Entering there, they took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image. And the priest stood at the entrance of the gate, and the 600 men who were armed with weapons of war. Got the picture? Verse 18. And when these went into Micah's house, and they took the carved image, the ephod, and the household idols, and the molded image, the priest said to them, what are you doing? The priest says, that's my livelihood. What are you doing? You can't just steal that stuff. Verse 19. And they said to him, be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us. Be a father and a priest to us. Which I think the first implication is, come with us and you get to live. It was quite an offer for him, actually. Put your hand over your mouth and come with us. Be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest of the household of one man, or that you should be a priest of a tribe and a family to Israel? So the priest's heart was glad. And he took the ephod and household idols and the carved image, and he took his place among the people. Hey, look, when you're in a time when everybody is doing what's right in their own eyes, it was right for them to take this. They needed a priest. What? There was right there was an idol and everything. Why would they not take it? Was it stealing? It was stolen before the idol was ever made. The whole basis of the whole thing was started out of thievery. There's no boundaries. There's no rules. There's no law. When everybody is doing what's right in their own eyes, we call it lawlessness. That way you can say, you can be a reporter. The city's burning to the ground. People are looting and breaking windows. And you go, it's a peaceful demonstration. Right? That's what you can do when everybody is doing what's right in their own eyes. There's no boundaries. It's ironic. It's a strong arm theft. The irony of lawlessness begets more lawlessness. And mom's lawlessness of her 1,100 shekels started in that home, has now polluted an entire tribe. That for the most part was polluted already, but there was nothing done to right that at all. Instead, it just threw more into the darkness. Verse 21. Then they turned and they departed. They put the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. And that was so that any pursuit from Micah's house of the posse that he might put together to come after them would not threaten the goods or the little ones. Verse 22. But when they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together, overtook the children of Dan, and they called out to the children of Dan. So they turned around and said to Micah, what ails you that you have gathered such a company? What's up, dude? Why are you guys chasing us down? 24. So he said, you have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priest, and you have gone away. And what more do I have? How can you say to me, what ails me? So if someone can carry your God away and leave you with nothing, pretty good indication you got the wrong God, and you got a problem on your hands. If you have to get a posse together to keep your God home, something's not right, you know. What a sad situation. And the saddest part is it never occurs to them. And it never occurs to Micah, to Levi, to any of them that you can steal a God, that you can carry this God off, and somehow you can control this God and keep possession of this God, and then this God will serve you. What a messed up situation. I'm glad we're not like that. I think this is the warning of the scriptures. I guess is why this is in here. This is what our proclivity is that we would, this is in us. This is in us to do the exact same thing. If we aren't guarded and cared for and listening to the Holy Spirit that is in us. You know, I've looked very far to find some very similar wonky stuff. How can you say to me, what ails me? Verse 25, the children of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest the angry men fall upon you and tweet bad things about you and cancel you. Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you and you lose your life, the lives of your household. They did, in a time when everybody does what's right in their own eyes, is a time of lawlessness, and somebody says, why? You don't have to give a reason. You just said, shut up, or I'm going to cancel you. And that is what's playing out. You see it every day. It's playing out right before us as it pertains to our kids particularly, but Christianity very specifically, and many other things. Now, he was getting canceled. Like, shut up and go home and say no more and you get to live. Don't let your voice be heard here anymore. Verse 27, I didn't finish. Then the children of Dan went their way. And when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went home. He went back to his house without his God. That was a long ride home with a lot to think about. Makes me wonder what he might have thought about. So they took the things, verse 27, Micah had made and the priest and who had belonged to them, went to Laish, to the people quiet and secure, and they struck them on the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon and they had no ties with anyone. It was in a valley that belongs to Beth Rahab. And so they rebuilt the city there, and they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. It means wild lion. City means wild lion. It's kind of interesting. They called the city Dan after, and the writer makes it very clear, this was after their father, who was a son of Israel. And this was what that tribe had come to. Idolatry and lawlessness, and really just this unauthorized sort of slaughter of a people in a place that God did not direct them to. Verse 30, then the children of Dan, they set up for themselves a carved image. And here's the punchline. Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan. So Jonathan was the name of the Levite. We just got the Levite earlier. Now we're told his name. His name of Jonathan, and he's the son of Gershom, which is the son of Moses. And his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of captivity of the land. What an offense. How far they had fallen so quickly. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he made. And here's the other punchline. And all the time, the house of God was in Shiloh. This is the tabernacle. The place where they were supposed to be worshipped, and the place where God met men, where men met God. Where sin was dealt with. Where holiness and the Holy of Holies and the most holy place on the earth was maintained by God's priests. Where people could have access to the God and learn about their God. The whole time it was there, being ignored. I got about a 2-hour closing. Let me skip to just a sort of a couple items that I really need to close it. This idolatry of Dan, which sort of alluded to, can be tracked back to this 1,100 cursed shekels. And if you just had to sort of draw a conclusion from that, you could say, I think the curse remained on him. Because everything that flowed out of that was just wonky and wrong. We see the lack of principles by mom. We see celebrated this stolen money and spending it on an idol. You see the effect of the idol, and really begins that you could kind of sum this all up to say a little leaven made its way all the way through the nation of Israel. I ran across two things. J. Vernon McGee, which I had to put him in here. He said every nation goes down in this order. It starts with a religious apostasy. And then there's a moral, what he calls moral awfulness. The technical word, right? Moral awfulness. Political anarchy. He said deterioration begins at the temple, then to the home, finally to the state, and that is when the nation and where the nation fails. Religious apostasy, what does that look like in this day? This is when people begin to do what's right in their own eyes. When we set the Bible down, when the churches are now following and more interested in what the state thinks about them, what people think about them, what the corporations think about them, and instead of worrying about what God thinks. And then the lawlessness and the political anarchy. The other quote from J. Vernon McGee. This is a period of compromise, corruption, and confusion, which are the marks of apostasy at any time. Compromise, corruption, and confusion, marks of apostasy at any time. We are in a state of apostasy today. The church has compromised. It is in a state of corruption and confusion. Our problem is that it is not returning to the authority, which is the Word of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who is revealed in that Word. That's a 30-year-old quote. He saw apostasy in that day. He would be wound up pretty tight today to see what was going on. Bow our heads.